Hello, welcome to the National Parents Union Nightly Restorative Check-In. I am your host, Marisol Quevedo Rerucha. I am born and raised and living in San Diego, California. I am the mother to Camerina, Emilia, and Sofia. I am the daughter to Irma Navran. I am the grandmother to Isabela Luna and Cynthia Iliana. And I'm the granddaughter to Camerina, Alejandro, Francisco, and Carmen. Thank you again for joining us. And I'm really hoping that you can also join us tomorrow night. So the nightly restorative check-in show was started back in March, right with all of the craziness of COVID, really the week after schools got shut down. So here in San Diego, our school shut down on March 13th. The following week is when the National Parents Union started providing Facebook Live shows to support our parents. And our first show was Live with MPU, which is an English show, and then our Spanish show, and then we also had Christina Laster's show, Managing Day to Day. And the shows were really, the live show and our show in Spanish were really for information sharing, to get parents resources for this change to online learning. And then our Managing Day to Day, the first focus was really around meeting the needs of our kids with IEPs. So immediately MPU did a pivot from the plans that we had and provided this online Facebook Live content to support. The purpose of this show, the Nightly Restorative Check-In, is to do a check-in with our guests to find out who they are and how they are. And so we were doing the show. I was doing the show 5 nights a week. As summer got closer, we changed to 3 nights a week. And I asked Dr. Anjali, who hosts, she was actually one of my first guests on the show. And then she also supports our Spanish show. And so I tapped her to do the Friday night show. So I'm here with you on Monday and Wednesday. Dr. Anjali is with you on Friday. If you didn't catch her show last Friday, please do. October was Domestic Violence Awareness Month, and she had Stephanie Noriega, a social worker, come in and talk. And I know a lot of our viewers, I saw in the comments, really found the resources, the discussion beyond helpful. And so let me just fast forward quickly to this week. So tomorrow is our election, and there is a lot of emotion for people. There is, and I think the emotion is all over the place because of the way that we're voting. We're really thinking we may not have the results. We might not know, the fate, the next steps of our country by tomorrow night. And then just depending on how things go, there's just a lot of unknown factors. And so I asked Dr. Anjali to host a special edition with me tomorrow. And so tomorrow night, we're going to have an election night edition. We're inviting people on. We're inviting youth. We're inviting elders. We're inviting parents to come on and do a check-in and or make an offering to our community. And an offering in the, that could be a poem that they've written. It could be a song that they want to sing. It could be some words, some powerful words that they want to share with us. And so it's really tomorrow night. The format's going to be a little bit different. We have a number of guests that will be coming on at different times. But it's really, if you need a moment out from election night coverage, or you just need a moment, I'm hoping that we'll be able to offer some inspiration to everybody. So please join us tomorrow night. And then I will be with you again on Wednesday. Thursday is our first National Parents Union Town Hall. We just finished our October polling. So we'll be announcing the polling. There's a couple of big announcements at the town hall. One is our national polls will be reviewing all of that data and of what parents are saying about schooling and what they want and what it is that's happening. We're going to have a great panel discussion with former Secretary of Education, Arnie Duncan, 2 amazing parents, and also Dr. Felisa Ortiz Licon, who is an educational advocate. And actually, she's more than that. She's also she was a board member here in the state of California on our the Board of Education. And so that's Thursday night. So please make sure that you register for that. And Friday is Dr. Anjali's show. So I'll find out who the guest is and share with you. We'll talk about that tomorrow night. So please make sure to join us. So we have a lot going on with MPU. Whew, okay. It's a lot of announcements. Also, don't forget to vote. Please continue reaching out to your family members, continue reaching out to your neighbors, continue talking to your family about voting. There are some states where if you are not registered to vote, you can still go in and register and vote tomorrow. Make sure that you look up with the registrar of voters in your state, in your county, and find out what those rules are, okay? Every family votes. And so please, please, please make sure that you're doing that tomorrow. There was one thing I wanted to share with you before we do our breathing technique. So I found this at Target yesterday. It was on clearance for like $1. It was $1.53. I think that this would be really great. It says calming strategies on this big banner. These are meant for a classroom, but with, I think, you know, all of us in our home, if we have a calming space, there's some different techniques that you can use, visual reminders for your kids and family. So different things that you can focus on. And then also, here's your reminder about your breathing. Take a breath, hold your breath, and blow it out. So that's what we're going to do next for our breathing and calming strategy. 4, 7, 8. We're going to inhale for 4 seconds. We hold for 7 and we release for 8. And I'll do the countdown for us. Now, remember, we do this 4 times. If at any point you're breathing, the holding is too long, the release is too long, just go back to your regular breathing and try to join us on the next round in. And I always recommend that you do this at least once a day. Okay, so let's go ahead and get ready for our breathing. Feet firmly on the ground. If you want to put your hands gently on your lap and either close your eyes, or if you want to just focus on something in the ground in front of you, take a breath out. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Inhale, 2, 3, 4, hold, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, release, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Thank you. Thank you for joining me. With that, I'm going to have our guests come on. Hello. So everybody,
hey,
hello. I want to introduce Gabriel Nunez Soria, and I'm going to have you actually introduce yourself. So if you can please share anything that you would like about yourself, about your family, about your love, about your passions, about any challenges, about your work, anything that you want, whatever you're comfortable sharing. If you could please introduce yourself to us.
All right. So my name is Gabriel Ramon Nunez Soria. I was born and raised in San Diego. I was actually born at Paradise Valley Hospital. My mother's name is Caroline Jean Moran, and my father's Rene Nunez. They were both actually born in San Diego as well, and I found out as a youth it was kind of rare that I was, I guess technically a third generation if you think my grandparents, immigrated to San Diego. My mom's parents were from Ohio, of primarily like Scottish, I don't know, just kind of a European mutt, a lot of Scottish, English, French, actually mainly Scottish, but so they were from Ohio. That's Stephen Moran and Marjorie. And then, but I just always called her grandma. I didn't really know her name till much later in my life. And then my dad's parents were actually from my tata, who I didn't meet. He passed away when I was about 2 months old, of cirrhosis. He was an alcoholic, and unfortunately, I didn't really get to meet him. He was from La Paz, and then my nana, my abuela, was from Cacalotan, in Sinaloa, in el municipio de El Rosario, near Mazatlan. And I have, a beautiful wife, Sandra Nunez Soria, who my companion, and we've been together for quite a while now. And we had actually 3 boys. Adrian Concepcion Dermen, who I met when he was around 7. So we have like a blended family, but he is my first son. And I still remember in the car, like we were driving one time, and when Sandra was pregnant with our second son, and he was like, "But I'm still going to be your first son, right?" And I was like, "Man, that was beautiful." It's like, yeah, of course, and you're gonna already. And then my middle son, Miguel Nunez Soria, Miguel Ejeca Ramado, and then my youngest son, Emmanuel Rene Tepeyolo Nunez Soria. And just, I'm blessed to be alive today, to be in a home, to be real honest, it's definitely been a struggle lately, for a lot of different reasons. I'm sure a lot of our parents know, I'm sure, you can relate, Marisol, but the work that I'm doing, I think I would start with something, that I really was able to tap into, really over the last few decades. I worked as a teacher for a while. My dad was also a professor. He was a teacher. My mom is a nurse. So both in helping professions. And, my father was really involved in the Chicano movement. So I was essentially raised Chicano, really thinking that way. And as I got into school leadership, it really, I was able to kind of really think about, well, what are my values? Like, how am I leading through my values? Am I really doing that? And I really went back to some of what what the Chicano movement was about. And for me, I've consolidated the 3 main pillars, or the 3 main ideas in the Chicano movement, to self-determination. So really the belief in the right and the ability of each person and each community to determine who they are, and to know what's best for them, right? To learn that. I mean, it's always an ongoing process, right? But that it's not for me to tell somebody, nor is it for someone else to tell me. Of course, in the Chicano movement is really about, for Latinos, for Chicanos, to say, look, we're going to determine for ourselves. We're going to name ourselves, right? And that power in naming. And then the second value I really lean on is critical consciousness. I know some people just say critical thinking, but I think it's a little bit more than that. So when we talk about access to higher education, for me, really, it's of course access to the resources in the mainstream, but it's also critical consciousness, which is really derived from Paulo Freire, from critical pedagogy. So looking at, when I learn to read, why am I learning to read? And why is it important that I really read between the lines, right? So like Freire used to say, I'm not just going to read the word, but I'm going to read the world. I'm going to learn to understand the power dynamics, right? And what's funny is that we already know intuitively, and so it's really just putting that into practice, right? And then the third one was what my dad would have called organic intellectualism. I think that's from Garreau, which is basically, that when I go to the university, I'm not going just for my own betterment, but really for the betterment of my community. So if I'm going to go and gain access to these resources, I'm going to bring those resources back into my community. And one of the best examples from his life, and my dad, just for the audience to know, passed away about 14 years ago, this last summer. But he did research in parent involvement, actually. So it's kind of funny that, we're here today. And it always stuck with me. He told me one of the first meetings, he sat down with some parents from Sherman Elementary, right there in Sherman. And so they all sat down and said, "Okay, profe, ¿qué hacemos? What do we do, profe?" And he said, no, I'm not here to tell you what to do. Like, I'm here to learn from you. You all are the experts of your community, of your children, of what you need. I'm here to help you, connect you to resources. So if you need to talk to the principal, I'm going to make sure that we're not being ignored, right? If you need, if we need research or we need something from the university, I'll go back over to the university. So that idea of really being a conduit, right? And coming back into the communities that we're from, rather than education being for my sole purpose to then escape, right? And so, I think those really, I was able to really dig in on really understanding those better and checking in with those values as a school leader. I taught for quite a while. I taught junior high for a little bit, and then I taught in high school, and then I ended up in independent study high school. So it's a little different. And for the last almost 10 years now, I've worked, actually for the last, 14 years, I've worked in independent study high school. So alternative high school. I know some people call it dropout recovery. I choose not to say it that way. I say we're re-engaging a lot of students who've been disengaged for many different reasons, either through their own choice or not through their own choice. And then I became a school leader within that model. And I've been a school leader now for about 6 or 7 years. So within that, I think it's beautiful. You started with a breathing technique, and so lately right now I'm working in understanding how do we really get to equitable outcomes through understanding trauma resilience. So not just trauma informed necessarily and understanding our trauma, but the resilience that we each have in how we thrive, how we survive in our communities, and how can we learn from these communities, right? And mindfulness is one of those. And so I'll just, I'll go to that and probably end there. But the mindfulness, what I'm learning is that, when I really started to dig in on some of the techniques, in certain meditation techniques, heart math is another one, the Heart Math Institute. So that's a beautiful resource if anyone wants to look at that. And I could talk more about that, during this call as well. But I started to recognize, well, I've also been participating. I'm lucky enough that the Chicano community here in San Diego was connected through the Kumeyaay community, through a few of the elders in the community, to ceremonies outside of San Diego as well. And through these indigenous ceremonies, these native ceremonies, I'm realizing, there's a lot of mindfulness there too. I mean, that's primarily what we're doing, right? Is sitting and really focusing in on our heart space, and as a community working towards healing and working towards really finding the strength in ourselves to serve our community. So, I think it's a beautiful thing, and I think that the more we learn about it, the more we might realize that there's our nanas and abuelos and abuelas have probably been doing it already, and maybe we just don't even know that what they're doing is a form of mindfulness. So, it's beautiful. I'm blessed that I get to work and do research on mindfulness and trauma resilience and, social emotional learning and emotional intelligence, as well as with really the goal of equity, right? Looking at how are we really serving our students and our communities, and are our students really being served the way that they should be? I'm also currently in a PhD program at USD, a PhD in education for social justice. And my goal with that is to really, hopefully, I mean, if I have to do it virtually, I will, but I'm hoping in the next year or two, things are going to open up and I can sit with students and say, hey, like what's working and what's not. And I really want to hear from them, within this idea of a relationship, right, at school, or a relationship in our lives. From what I've been able to glean and read, it's through relationships that we heal. It's through relationships that we learn, and really through relationships and community that we create power. So my goal with my PhD is to learn from the students and to learn from the community, because we work with a lot of adult students. So of course I would love to hear from parents as well, and really understand, how do our relationships, especially for our students, for our parents, how is that shaping what we're doing in these spaces? And rather than me again come in like I have my ideas about it, but I want to hear from everyone as well. So my last idea there is that I would bring this theory, bring any of the research to the people, right, and say, look, this is the research, this is what it's saying, but what do you think of that? And let's create together, so that we can create some frameworks around how to do this better. And then, the students and the parents, and we can go teach the teachers, okay, this is what we need to be doing.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So in looking at all this, I'd love to be able to talk more about, one of the resources that actually I just saw recently, and hopefully I can text it to you, Marisol, is a resource if you on Instagram, Restore More. I know it's kind of a weird little thing, but it's about a post-election safety plan. So I know that's been on our minds a lot lately. Is what's going to happen after tomorrow? What are we going to be looking at? And so to just bring it into the present moment, this resource looks really interesting. A colleague of mine sent it out. Do you have a post-election safety plan in place? Um, I hate that we even have to talk about this, but we've seen too much this year to be naive. So we just really want to make sure that people are thinking about if, regardless of who wins the election, there could be anger, there could be violence. We need to be prepared physically and mentally for that. And I know that's part of what Marisol was talking about for tomorrow. And so this, I'll see if maybe Marisol or somebody can send the link out. Worst or more, there's a checklist for physical safety. There's also a mental health safety checklist, important questions to consider, and then important question, that goes for a little while, and be prepared and safe. So that's a resource that I think is really useful. Another thing that just in voting in general, know that, know your rights in voting. There's actually a national, hey. So I pivoted to voting just because that was what on my mind right now. So we're talking a little bit about, I sent you a link to a preparedness list in case things go a little south after tomorrow.
Yeah, and I see that Mona Contreras had written in there, can you repeat the Instagram resource?
Okay.
So I will see if it's Restore Move On is the name of the.
It's weird. It just says like WERE, Restore Move On. So I'm not sure. Oh, We Restore More. That's what it is. I can't read it because it's all one word. We Restore More.
Okay. At We Restore More on Instagram. Okay, so I'll put that in there for you, Mona, and for anybody else. Thank you for that resource, and I'm sorry. I think I'm going to have to we're going to have to figure out how to move me down here. It's funny, like all day long, I'm fine. And then this time of night comes and my internet, this is the second time it shut down. So I just want to thank you for everything that you shared. And I want to just go back a little bit to the beginning. And just talk a little bit more about your family, about your three sons and your wife, and how, what I'm just wondering is, how do you do this work of, and I see it, like the self-determination that you talked about, critical consciousness, organic intellectualism. How are you raising your kids with your partner, with your wife, to be critically conscious, to really understand that, like, self-determination, to practice that? How are you doing that as a dad, and also the organic intellectualism?
So, I met my wife 18 years ago in 2002, and we've been married 16 years now. And, it's, we both, that was a big part of how we met, was through the Chicano community, was through our circles, actually through some of our ceremonial circles, right here in San Diego. So, I think that a big part of it is through that. If I think about, my children now have grown up. Me and Sandra have dialogued some about it, about how they're growing up different than we did, right? I grew up more kind of, like in my dad's classrooms, going to demos, going to protests, and they do some of that, but they're at ceremony. They've grown up with ceremony now, and it's just a different kind of modality. And a big part of ceremony is there's a lot of structure in a certain way there around, like, we're going to respect people, and especially children and women and elders, right? And so that's just like a value that's just really built in. And then through that, we also, me and my wife, constantly are having dialogue with them. So I think that's really the main thing we're doing, is we bring things up. If something's going on, we're talking to them about it, right? And then, they're also different. I mean, that's the thing about, if I really believe in self-determination, they're going to determine for themselves how they do what they do. I think of Adrian, he doesn't necessarily go to a lot of demos, but he'll sit down and talk to you about it. And him and his friends will talk a lot about it. They have a different way of expressing it right now for them. And that's, that's how he does that. So
how old is Adrian again?
He's 25. No, wait. Yeah, he just turned 25. Yeah, I was going to say 24. He's 25 now. And then my middle son is 13 and my youngest is 11. But, I think, like my middle son loves history. So he just digs in, right? So you'll start talking to him and he'll just start rattling things up. So it's just different, right? And he had a different kind of, Adrian is very like, brings people together a lot. So he'll bring his friends together. And is just really soft, kind of soft spoken, and, he's really excited, kind of like a teddy bear, whereas Miguel is a little more like very, very loyal, but also very like how would I put it? He that loyal can turn into like he wants to defend the community. He wants to like, and that's something that I think for both men and women, but I know for being a man, it's something that we've looked at and working with young men. Young men want to be warriors. I think young women do too, right? And so how do we, if that goes unfocused, it can go badly, right? We want to be warriors. We want to defend our family. We want to defend our community. And so I think through ceremony, through Chicanismo, we have that dialogue. I think it's just a lot of dialogue. It's a lot of talking and then listening. And then, but we've also, of course, it's like my dad used to say, nothing is not political. There's no instance of teaching is apolitical. You can think you're being apolitical, but it just means you're not aware, right, of how you're being political. I don't believe in necessarily objectivity either. I think that's kind of this almost the same conversation. So of course we have, an agenda, right? I want my kids to think critically. Think about it, Miko. Really think, what happened when you did this? What happened? And how did people feel? And so, I don't want to put too much of their business out, but I think, if instances have come up, at school or things, I'll sit down and I'll say, Miko, what happened? And how did it go? And have you thought about these dynamics there? Have you thought about how race might be playing out and what's going on right now in this interaction? And he's like, oh, and it's like, and then of course we've had, they both wear long hair. I used to wear long hair until it stopped cooperating. Right. And that's a little different too for a young male who has long hair in our society, and especially when they were little. I remember multiple times that, it's like, oh, how she's so cute. No, it's a boy. Sandra's, if she's watching right now, can probably remember. There's one in particular where I told the guy like 3 times, no, he's a boy. And he just couldn't get past that. So, and so, but then it turned into like a conversation. There's one I wrote a blog piece about where Miguel came home one day from school and they were going to school out in East County, where as much as people, we may have certain views about East County, but they are a little more aware of Native people because there's more communities, right? They're right along more of the reservations. And he came home and he said, Papa, what tribe are we part of? Again, he's been raised in ceremony. So when they asked him why he had long hair, he said, because I'm Native. And they said, well, what tribe? And he didn't know how to answer. I said, well, Mijo, we're not part of that kind of tribe. We're part of the Chicano tribe. I couldn't really, we're not card holding. We're not, we're not part of a North American recognized tribal community or nation, right? And so, again, then we have a conversation about it. Well, what does that mean, being Chicano? It's a little confusing sometimes, right? I mean, even more so for, myself, and he's pretty light skinned too. It's like we have this duality of walking around in a white body, and there's some privilege that comes with that, while also, definitely having the spirit and being raised with the Chicano identity. So, I think dialogue. That keeps coming back to me that, we have the dialogue. And then there's just something, I don't know. There's something, I don't know if I can put a finger on it. I'll tell you when, 4 years ago, when, right now with the election looming, I'm probably going to start crying. We were sitting there watching it. I mean, he was 10 years, he was 9 years old, Miguelito, and Emmanuel was there too. And I remember when we kind of started really dawning on us, oh man, like Trump really won. He just started crying. And we had to turn off the TV and just be like, all right, Miko, it's okay. Let's do something else. But so there's something there about our empathy, that if we build that, or some people are just, a little more attuned to that. So, I think we just build on that, right? Anytime he comes with a question, we're willing to have that dialogue.
Well, and I think you talk about the first thing that you talked about when I asked you about how it is that you're raising your kids and building this, because you talked about this framework through the lens of your work, your values through the lens of your work, of self-determination, critical consciousness, and organic intellectualism. And because I know there's so much, like, a value is such a part of you, there had to be a way that you were integrating that in your family. And the first thing you talked about was ceremony. So really, that's a spiritual foundation that has been developed. And I think that a lot of families and a lot of, that's where a lot of the belief system and the values and how you are with others in relationship with your children, it comes from, it can come from a spiritual base. from a faith-based almost. And talking about, so this is a national broadcast, and so some of the places that you mentioned, I usually try to jump in there and just context, because not everybody knows San Diego or knows, like, you had mentioned East County, that your son was in East County. East County is an area, like you said, that does have a lot, that we have tribes, but it's also an area that I think, did the Grandmaster of the KKK live in East County?
Yes, David Duke, right?
Yeah, so it's an area, so it's a very rural area as well.
Yeah, it's complicated.
Yeah.
And I think too, though, I mean, the way, as you were talking, it dawned on me that, I think of Chicanismo like a way of life, or almost like a consciousness, rather than, it's not the ideas that I'm talking about aren't necessarily like an ethnicity, and my dad used to even talk about that way. My mom is white, but he would say, well, she's Chicana. Like they met at the UFW, right? They met organizing for the United Farm Workers Union. So not to say that people should just walk around saying they're Chicano. That's not what I mean. But just like you're saying, that belief system is so important, right? How do we cultivate that? What does that mean to us? Because my dad would call himself a recovering Catholic, right? And was essentially atheist until later in his life. So I wasn't really raised with maybe that kind of faith, as you're talking about, that kind of faith-based thing. So I think a lot about like the values that come with that, in any family, right? That we come to believe things. We come to believe what and know and focus on what's important to us, right? And I think we do a lot of that. Our kids, as much as they may act up here in the home, we keep hearing when we go meet people, they go up and they shake people's hands, they say hello, they introduce themselves. Well, they primarily learn that at ceremony. When you come into a space, hey, go say hi to your elders. Go, you go and you present yourself. So there's a lot of things like that just through kind of the culture, right? Through being in those spaces that they've learned. And And
when you talk about ceremony is really like the indigenous spiritual practice.
Yes.
That, like you mentioned, that is here in North America, but also throughout all parts of the world, there's indigenous culture and ceremony. And so part of the practice here, and there's also, like I hear a lot of people that refer to themselves as Mexica, because like not knowing the tribe, not knowing, as colonized people, you get that the language gets taken from you, that tribal connection, that people connection gets taken from you. So like you can just go back and say, like I do, like I have two grandparents from Sonora, one from Durango, one from Baja California. And so some of that land you can trace, and that there's, like there's Yaqui in Sonora, the Taurumara, it's different. So you can kind of put it together, but without really knowing, that there is indigenous blood in you. And so like that ceremony or those practices of I think within ceremony is also, like you said, that respect for elders, that elders have the word, and that way that you greet one another, the way that you walk into a space, there is a deep connection and an understanding, like that you had talked about with relationships, but we're also connected and responsible, not just for each other, but for our earth.
Yeah.
And for the animals of the earth. And so I think those pieces, that the values that you talked about, they do absolutely go hand in hand with like an indigenous values as well.
Yeah. And that was, a big part of what my dad raised me thinking. He's like, no, we're indigenous. That's what, we're being Mexicano, you're mestizo, which means you're mixed, which means that you're, you have native blood. And according to white supremacy, if you have native blood, then you're not white, right? So we're not, even though we might be invited in at times, right? I mean, if you look right now at the census and the fact that you can click Hispanic and white at the same time, there's something going on there, right? Where, we could probably say that, well, there's a way to maybe make it, if Latinos want to, that they can look and be counted more as white. But rather than digress down that, but I do think that there's definitely something there. Danza Azteca comes up. My wife has done Danza Azteca since she was a teenager. And so we did that for a little while too. And so that's another space, right? That is just like you're saying, there's a lot of reverence there for the fact that we're related. We're all related.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like my dad said, obviously you don't want to air out your dirty laundry. You got to take care of your community, but it doesn't mean that we don't, you look at, even one of our leaders out, at Ceremony Arizona, we look at the medicine wheel and said, that's all people in the medicine wheel. We're not just praying for Native folks, but we do have to take care of our community. Right. And so, there's a lot of dualities there. So I think that's another one that for me comes up a lot is, these different dualities in our lives, and how do we address the there's nuance, and that the things are ambiguous at times and they're complicated. And we don't have to always simplify them. Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I was really, really interested in when you started talking about the connection again with ceremony and with your connection to your indigenousness, around like the meditation and the mindfulness that you are. So these are practices that you're doing at your school sites or in your online learning environment.
So yeah, so that's some of what we're doing. Yeah. So like I have my own practice, right, of mindfulness. And I think that's when some of it really dawned on me. But let me start with what you're saying. So yeah, in our schools right now, we're primarily looking at HeartMath, the HeartMath Institute, since quite a few of us have been trained in that. So the HeartMath Institute is an institute that's done quite a bit of research around heart-focused breathing. And so what they found is that in the research, and actually Nola Butler-Bird, who's here in San Diego, she was talking to me about this in 2004 when I was in the community-based block program in my master's program at San Diego State. She was actually doing some of her research on this. So there's 40,000 neurodendrites, which are essentially just another word for brain cells around the heart. And so what they found in the research is that the heart does a lot to regulate our brain. Our heart is actually sending messages to our brain on a very consistent basis. And so when we can focus in and breathe, and any kind of deep breathing like that, even if you just deepen your breath a little bit, or even just focusing in on your breath, can help reduce your heart rate. But what they're looking at primarily is what's called heart rate variability. So basically our heart rate is always changing. It's always going a little bit up and down, right? And the more that we can get into coherence, or like a stable up and down, and so, for instance, when you feel content, right? When you feel loved, when you feel, they've shown, like when you look at pictures of your kids, or when you're hanging out with your family and you're in a nice, a coherent space is also something that you can notice that we actually affect each other in those spaces. So that's some of the science right now that we're using, in a secular way, right? So that it's, very, palatable for everybody, right? We're not talking about religion or spirituality. For myself, I think when it really dawned on me, there was actually two times for me. One was actually quite a few years ago. I went to a Qigong. It was a free seminar, 3-day seminar on Qigong, which is a Chinese form of energy work. It's kind of like Tai Chi. It's a little bit different. And as I was listening, and I had already been going to ceremony for a while, and I was listening to this Chinese medicine man. I mean, that's what he called himself, right? Talking about some of these things. And I was like, wow, that's kind of like what we do at ceremony, right? He was talking about how they chant. And that's essentially kind of like their protection. And I was thinking about the songs we sing and how they're smudge. And so it was like, there was a lot of parallels. And I was like, wow, like this is kind of, and I've always really been intrigued by religious studies, just comparative religion. And the more I look, it just seems like there's all these parallels. And like you said, in both indigenous and most religions around the world are based on almost the same things everywhere, right? It's about love. How do we love each other? How do we protect each other, right? And so, let's fast forward to a few years ago. I was really having a hard time. I was struggling with depression. I was struggling with stress at work. And my brother-in-law handed me some CDs. They were Pema Chodron, who's a Buddhist meditator, right? He says, hey, I really think you can get something out of this. Why don't you listen to these? So I was sitting there listening, and it got to where, a lot of it was really helpful. I mean, some of it was really hard because it's really like breaking yourself down to almost, right, really looking at how do I let go of my ego? How do I really let go of myself, right? And just accept the fact that I can't fix all these things, and things are going to be broken sometimes. But I got to Tonglen, which is a form of Buddhist meditation where I started listening to what she was saying. She says, what you do is you think about somebody who's having a hard time. It could be somebody you know, it could be somebody you don't know, it could be somebody you passed, on the street who you saw maybe struggling, or somebody in your family. She said it could even be yourself. And you just breathe in. So this is kind of the opposite of how I think some people think of relaxing and meditating, but you breathe into that pain and that frustration. And she would use a lot of like dualities again, a lot of like, you'd breathe into, like she says, you kind of like it's not a hardening, but like this kind of heat, right? And then you breathe out relief, and you breathe out this opening, right? But as I was listening, I was like, man, that's what we do. Like at one of the main ceremonies I go to, we go out there and we say, look, we're going to come out here and we're going to suffer for the people. We're going to take in their pain, and we're going to ask for relief. And I was just like, that's like, it was, as I was listening to her, I was like, man, I've already been doing this. I've been doing years of this, So it really helped me focus in on like, oh, okay, there's just another form of that same kind of work on building compassion, on building a strength, a foundation of strength in myself. And recognizing that, we're just people and we have to humble ourselves. And it's through community, right? And through looking at, whatever you believe your higher power is, or whatever that mystery of life is, and really being able to kind of release to that, but then also cultivate that inner strength. So it really started to come together for me that, man, these things aren't that different.
There's like, what I find really fascinating about the work that you're doing with heart math, and also just the way that you're describing those connections and how they flow in, and then also going into ceremony or going into like this tradition that Pema Chodron talked about. I'm sorry, this meditation of like empathy, of connecting. So it's almost like this of connecting with others. And I remember reading or hearing that, that you can get into a heart rhythm with another person, where your heart rates and your heartbeats start to kind of hit at that same time. And almost like what happens with women who spend a lot of time together, when their cycles start to mirror each other.
Yeah.
And so I just think I'm very excited about like that work of the heart and the understanding of the heart, because I also think that there's something in there with the connection and relationships. I had seen also this picture of what it was. It was like a bunch of different bowls of water, and what happened to different bowls with different types of music. And there was like a snapshot of the vibrations, and they absolutely looked like pieces of art. And so they had put all of these bowls together and the different vibrations. It was so beautiful. And I started thinking, like, we're mostly water.
Yeah.
Our heart has a lot of water. Our brain has a lot of water. And so even, like you're talking about in ceremony, like that spirit, like the act of the singing, the music, the instruments, like all of those things, I think that are really important for us to connect with. So there's like different levels of connection, right? That connection with others, the connection within self, and the connection with other things that bring us kind of experience and joy, that I think is really beautiful.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think doing that work with kids. So are you teaching kids heart math?
We're getting there. So right now we're training all of, a lot of the groups of staff. And we're going to be working on a student heart math, like meditation elective, and then also ongoing activities. And then eventually we'll probably be training, students to learn about, like the in and outs of it. What you're talking about, actually, that they do research. They started doing it just with people and animals first. They also did it with babies and a baby and a mom. And so, like, for instance, with the dog, so they did one where they could monitor the heart rate variability of the dog and this young boy who was one of the owners, and how the dog, when they were sitting together, their heart rate variabilities came into sync. They were in coherence together. And when the boy would leave, the dog would go out of coherence and was waiting for the boy to come back. And then the boy would come back, and then they would get in coherence again. They also did studies to show how when you have stressful situations, how that causes you to go out of coherence, right? And then when you have, a more calming and more loving environment, that causes you to come into coherence, and how we can influence each other, like you're saying, right? So if I come into a space very agitated, depending on everyone else, how they can defend themselves or not with that, they're going to then, right, that's going to influence how their hearts beat, versus if I can come in and de-escalate, right?
That is so powerful, because we know that we get impacted by other people when they come in the room with their, like, either the energy that they come in with, right? Like if somebody comes in, even without saying a word, the way that they're carrying themselves, the expression on their face, and it changes the atmosphere of the room. It can
Yeah.
change the atmosphere. And I think also, like in households where kids are dealing with these different kinds, or even adults are dealing with these different kinds of reactions, right, that can cause or these different kinds of interactions that can really cause trauma. If there's abuse happening in the home, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of, so like that disconnect then within the, can you maybe open the door? Sorry, so I'm in my kitchen now.
Okay. Yeah, no, I hear you.
Work something out, because I think this is where I'm going to have to do the show. Sorry, everybody. Usually it's nice and quiet in my little office. But that, I mean, the implications of, I think, just the awareness that heart math is going to provide students around what happens in like when your heart is good, when your heart is in coherence, like that space that you want your heart in, and what happens, like I think it gives us like ownership, right, of our reactions to things.
Yeah. And you know, and for me, it also comes back to like, how do I work on my own, like you were saying, compassion, empathy? Well, how about for myself? Because that's ultimately, you know, especially, you know, I primarily work with staff right now, with the adults, but you know, we have some activities coming up with youth later this month, later this year, before the new year. But really looking at, you know, in all of these practices, even, you know, and that's some of the things that started hitting me too when I started getting into some of the meditation practices. A lot of it's like working on my own, like, you know, I'm going to sit and I'm going to breathe, and when thoughts come up, I got to not judge them. And I was like, I went back and started thinking, well, some of the leaders at ceremony were like, you know, we don't need the self-pity anymore. We gotta love ourselves. We're beautiful people. We're beautiful human beings, and we have to love ourselves. And that's the first thing, right? And then we can realize, oh, but it helps if I have someone else that loves me too, right? In a real genuine way, right? That can accept my whole self coming in. And I think that's where the relationship piece comes in, is, are we really creating spaces in these institutions, right? In these places right now, virtually, right? Or somewhat physically, where students can bring their whole self. You know, is a student allowed to be angry at school? I hope so, right? Because that's part of what that might be. There might be something they're really angry about. And that's where I lean on, you know, Duncan Andrade talks about Socratic hope. So he has he has a book too that he helped write, but in his article, a note to educators, right? Hope is required to grow roses from concrete. And he talks about Socratic hope. But you know, the basic element there is, do we really believe in every kid that comes in, that they can really do, you know, be their whole self? And do we accept that of them, right? And create a space where they have a voice.
Well, and you know, I think that the answer to some of those questions you can see reflected in suspension data, expulsion data, teacher stress regarding classroom management. So that is not the way that our system has functioned. No. What you're talking about, you know, like, are students allowed to be angry? They're not. Are they allowed to be disappointed? Are they allowed to question? In a lot of spaces, they aren't. But I think that's part of the transformation of what's happening in education, in educational systems, is that is starting to shift. And I think also with the understanding that everybody's starting to develop regarding like social and emotional learning and the importance of that there's a shift that's happening in education.
Yeah. And let's have a real heart-centered, right, healing-centered space. And if we can start there, then we're going to be able to get to those other places, right? If I start with our heart connection, if I start with, hey, how you doing today? But I really want to hear about that, right? Yeah. And, you know, and it's work. Don't get me wrong. I know that there's compassion fatigue. I know that there's and to be real, you know, honest, I know there's tons of teachers that's their goal, right? And that's what they're trying to do. So we're, you know, I'm just trying to build spaces where we can work on how to do that better as much as we can. And, you know, and I am excited. The heart math I just learned this summer in depth, you know, and so I'm actually really excited about it.
And how is it being received by teachers, this shift that your system is proposing?
So, you know, I mean, in certain ways, like the more that I look at it, it's kind of like you were saying earlier, I think that I've been doing a lot of things kind of like this already, you know, But I'll speak like, for instance, for me, one of the ones that comes up is restorative justice practices, right? If we really look at what that is, right? When we first started using that at our schools, even the teachers who were like, yeah, we got to do that, something would happen, an incident, a student would act out, we would have a restorative meeting, we'd move on, and then teachers would be like, well, what was the consequence? Are they going to get punished? And I'm like, wait, hold on. I thought we all wanted to do it this way instead, right? So I said that young person came into a room with like 5 other people and had to own their stuff. Like, that's not easy, right? That's not easy for us to do. So, I think it takes time. Right now, the HeartMath, it seems like people are really excited. I think in the virtual space, we're really starting to move. I'm actually helping our whole network. So, from all throughout California, even Cleveland and a few other places. So there's quite a few teams that are really moving into really embracing that, embracing the looking at what does trauma mean? What does that really mean? And how does it affect our behavior? And then not victimizing anybody. The point isn't to say, oh, these poor kids. No. We all have survived trauma. So let's look at ourselves and let me learn how to be, a more resilient person so that I can recognize that resilience in somebody else and help them bring that strength into the space. But so far it's been pretty well received. It's tough. I mean, right now I know my sister-in-law is a teacher, and I talked to some of our teachers, and working in the virtual space to really do it well is more work usually than it has been in the classroom. So I know that our teachers are, kind of up to, really, really kind of swimming in it. But we try to really focus in on self-care and start with that mindfulness and self-care first. So that, because that, but it leads to then, okay, if I have to, like you said, I have a relationship with myself. How am I treating myself? How do I love myself? So that then now how am I doing that with other people? Now, when we're getting to that point where we can articulate those things, now we can look at equitable outcomes. Is what I'm doing leading to positive outcomes with students? Am I really, and if it is, great. How can we improve a little? If it's not, then we got to go back to the beginning, right? Am I really taking care of myself? Do I really believe in these kids? So there's some tough conversations there. And we get pushed back in different ways all the time. But again, I go back to dialogue, right? I'm welcoming that dialogue. I'm going to open spaces up, present some of the material, but really create spaces where, teachers have a lot of expertise as well, right? It's not like we're coming in just to tell them how to do it. No, we're going to do this together. And every community is different. That's another piece from Duncan Andrade. He talks about community responsive, right? Culturally responsive, great. Let's be aware, right? But when I go into a community they have a unique culture right there. I can't assume because I'm walking into an Asian American community or a Black community that I already know how to respond to the people there. No, I need to sit and listen, no matter what community I'm going into. So going into these teacher communities and then them, and then with the communities of parents and students we're working with, our goal is to really be community, right, responsive. And that takes time. It takes work, right? So, but I for the most part, we're having a really positive response. Other than just people feeling overwhelmed right now. That's just the kind of, I think that our new normal is not very normal, right? And I've noticed it for me. My anxiety just sometimes is just really high. And like I said, about 5 years ago when I started listening to Pema Chodron, I really dug back in and I had done a lot of good work on myself, and I have for years, right? All that work in ceremony, I go to therapy, right? And it's a little uncontrollable right now. There's times I just got to be patient with myself and realize I'm going to have these crazy thoughts about like, does this person like me? Do they not, did I say the wrong thing? And I call back and they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, oh man, I'm going a little crazy right now. So, but that's, oh yeah.
The story. It's the story that you.
Yeah, we're all there, and, one of my beautiful teachers, Denny Allerman, may he rest in peace, used to always say, we're all a little bit crazy with a lowercase c, right? We all grew up in an imperfect world with imperfect parents that were hopefully doing the best they could. But we all have work to do, right? And the better I can know where my hangups are and what the work is I have to do, the better I can keep it out of me and you, right? Or when it comes up and you tell me, I'm like, oh God, you're right. That is my crap, right? And so that's part of the work. And I think that, some teachers, I think the only real pushback where sometimes I'm like, wait a minute, is they're like, oh, I teach English. No, you teach students, right? Yeah. And that requires you to have a personal relationship with those students. You don't have to be their friend. You don't have to have them on Facebook, but it requires you to bring your whole self there because that's what we need them to do. We need them to be welcome to bring their whole self.
I think some of the things that you're saying and that I've seen in the work, there's a lot of parallels between how we should be with in the system with our kids, and really also how we should be as parents with our kids. And I think just part of I think the humanity component, number one, is starting that work within. Yeah. Starting the work that we need to do, learning if we do not know how, learning how to be reflective, learning how to be open to the journey of growth and evolution that each of us have within ourselves. And that takes something that you talked about a little bit earlier, which is addressing the issues of your ego. And then also addressing, the traumas that you had and that you've come from either as a child or a young adult. Those things that help. I say sometimes, like, there is a story that somebody told us about ourselves that at some point we bought. And for a lot of us, that story includes something around us not being like our value, not understanding our value.
We're not good enough, right? There's something missing. There's something we got to fix. We could be better, right?
Enough, we were not good enough. And so I think in either space, just as human beings, really, whether you're in an educational system, you're a parent, is starting to do some of that work within yourself and your reflection. And, I think one of the greatest understandings that I have and I continue to have is how little we control. And what we control is how we respond to things. We don't control how other people behave. At some point, we don't control our own children, right? When they're little babies, we do. But what we control is how we respond. What we control is how we see things, how we perceive things. What we control, and you talking about, that perception sometimes of other people, when your self-esteem, your ego, and your stuff, and you're not in a good place, that they're the story starts to come back. But what you can do is you control then your next steps in your healing and on your journey with what you're going to do when you're talking to yourself in that way, or you're questioning things. And so it's really about all of us doing our work so that we can then really connect and know ourselves, so that we can then connect and know others. And then be able to support others in their development and their practice of self. I think that is the amazing medicine that we can carry, and that we can that we carry within, that we can give to ourselves and start to also provide with the community. And I also really love, the way that you talk about, we don't come either as educators, as parents, even with all the answers. It's not our show. No. It's not our show. So, but as a community and with your family, you can make that movement together, which is why I love the way that MPU frames every family votes. My kid isn't old enough to vote, but we talk about voting. We talk about our family vote. There's it's the unit working together, and not somebody coming in, as the adult or as the parent that's owning the work.
Yeah. I'd love to add one thing. I know we're almost done, but something you reminded me right now, I think it was Senora Enriquez. She was an elder here in San Diego, and unfortunately she's passed as well. But I remember she had a little teach-in, a little teaching session, and she talked about, she says, in a lot of ceremonies, we use feathers, and she's all, but you have right here, you can heal with these right here, and she talked about just that touch and just that loving each other, and so you said something right now, just reminded me of that. We have that in us, right? To be there and be present, and to, hey, I love you, and then be human with our kids, right? I'd say, I apologize sometimes. Hey, and I'm sorry I got so frustrated, but then I let them know this is what was going on. This is why I'm, you're come on, what are you doing? And we have a dialogue,
The same thing in school leadership. As a school leader in any leadership position, when you mess up, owning it and explaining. I think that's what makes the difference sometimes in effective leaders and in leaders and destructive leadership, is people that can, exactly what you're saying, doing with your kids, hey, I messed up. This is what I did. This was my learning from it. This is maybe why I did what I did. And this is why these are the changes that I'm going to make from this point on.
Yeah.
There's just I'm really appreciating the conversation, because again, I'm just seeing this is really, this is about being human, whether you're being human in your role as a parent, or whether you're or whether you're a teacher or a school leader, everything that we're talking about, it's really about who we are as human beings. and how we are the people that we love and the communities that we care about, and the change that we're hoping to make happen with our time on this earth, in this life.
Yeah. One of my best buddies, when I was trying to explain to him when I got into this new role of working with the trauma resilient communities, he's like, what does that mean? And I started explaining to him all these different things. So just like being human with each other, exactly what you say. He's like treating each other like human. He's like, yeah, that's exactly what it is. Yeah. Is how are we making sure that we're humanizing spaces, right? That we don't get so caught up in all these rules and think, no, come on. There's a human being sitting right there. What can we do to serve them? What's going on?
Yeah, because unfortunately, somewhere along the line, systems lost that. Somewhere along the line, there was a decision, or there were conversations that were made that humanity and that human connection didn't matter. And I think that's also why this time, this hour that we get to spend with our guests is so important, because it's just, again, coming back to that reminder of community. And I want to thank you for taking time away from your family and joining us. And I want to thank you. I also want to thank and recognize your ancestors. You've mentioned a couple of people, your dad, that have passed, that have been your mentors, your leaders, your guides. And I want to thank them as well. So thank you for coming in and joining us.
You're welcome, Marisol. Thank you for the invite. This was really good. Thank you.
Well, and you are welcome to come back. You let me know when. So
okay.
We're going to say good night. We will see you. Reminder that tomorrow we have the special election night show with me and Anjali. We have a number of guests that are coming on. So please, if you need the time, it's there for you. Have a beautiful night. Know that you are loved and cared for. Good night.